Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. This is a journey about family, pride, and discovering what really matters when everything changes. Enjoy the story. My name is Bartholomew Thompson, but everyone calls me Bart. I'm 68 years old, and I've spent my entire life believing that if you work hard and love your family, everything will work out. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was especially wrong about my son Carter. The day that changed everything was June 15th, Carter's wedding day. Not his first wedding, mind you. This was his second marriage, to a woman named Madison who came from money, the kind of money that makes people think they're better than folks like me. I'd been looking forward to this day for months. My boy was getting married, and despite all our problems over the years, I thought maybe this would be a fresh start for us. I'd bought a new suit, well, new for me. It was from the discount store, but it was clean and pressed, and I thought I looked decent enough. When I arrived at the church, I was early as always. I'm the kind of man who shows up 15 minutes before he needs to be anywhere. It's how I was raised. Carter was standing near the entrance in his expensive tuxedo, talking to some people I didn't recognize. Wealthy-looking folks in designer clothes. I walked up to him with a big smile, ready to congratulate my son and maybe get one of those father-son moments you see in movies. "Carter," I said, reaching out to shake his hand. "You look great, son. I'm so proud of you." He turned around, and the look on his face. I'll never forget it. It wasn't happiness or love or even basic politeness. It was pure embarrassment, like he'd just stepped in something unpleasant. "Dad," he said quietly, glancing nervously at the well-dressed people behind him. "You're here early." "Of course I'm early. It's my son's wedding day." Carter pulled me aside, away from his friends, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Dad, listen, I need to ask you a favor." "Anything, son." "What do you need?" "I need you to sit in the back." "Way in the back." "Madison's family, they're important people, and some of my business associates are here. It would just be easier if—" I stared at him, not understanding. "Easier if what?" "If you kept a low profile today. You know how it is." No, I didn't know how it was. This was my son's wedding, and he was asking me to hide. "Carter, I don't understand. I'm your father. I know that. But look around, Dad. These people, they're not like us. They're not like you." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not like me. My own son was telling me I wasn't good enough to sit with the family at his wedding. "Where exactly do you want me to sit?" "There's a section in the back. Behind the pillars. You'll still be able to see everything, but nobody will be able to see me." Carter's face flushed red. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be. This is important to me." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised from a baby, worked 3 jobs to put through college, sacrificed everything for, and I saw a stranger. A stranger who was ashamed of his own father. "Fine," I said quietly. "I'll sit in the back." The ceremony was beautiful, I suppose. I watched from behind a marble pillar as my son married a woman whose family had probably never worked with their hands a day in their lives. During the reception, I tried to approach Carter and Madison to offer my congratulations, but Carter intercepted me. "Dad, thanks for coming. I think it's probably best if you head home now. Madison's tired, and we have that early flight tomorrow. I haven't even met your wife properly." "You will. Soon. We'll have dinner or something." But we both knew that dinner would never happen. I drove home that night in my 15-year-old pickup truck, my new suit wrinkled from sitting alone in the back of the church, and I made a decision. I stopped at the gas station on the way home and bought a lottery ticket. Powerball. $5. The jackpot was huge, something like $800 million. I'd never bought a lottery ticket in my life. Always thought it was a waste of money. But that night, humiliated and heartbroken, I figured what the hell. What did I have to lose? 3 days later, I was in my garage, working on Mrs. Chen's lawnmower. I fixed things for my neighbors for free, just to keep busy, when I heard the lottery numbers on the radio. 03-17-23-39-44, Powerball 18. I pulled the crumpled ticket from my shirt pocket and checked the numbers. Then I checked them again. Then I sat down on my workbench and stared at that piece of paper for 20 minutes. $847 million. I had won $847 million. And for the first time since the wedding, I smiled. Sitting in my garage that day, holding that lottery ticket worth more money than I could comprehend, my mind went back to where it all started going wrong between Carter and me. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when my boy looked at me like I was his hero. Carter was 12 when his mother died. Susan had been sick for 2 years with cancer, and I'd used up every penny of our savings trying to save her. The medical bills nearly broke us, but I would have sold everything I owned if it meant one more day with her. When she passed, Carter and I were left alone in a world that suddenly felt too big and too expensive. I was 38 then, working as a mechanic at Henderson's auto shop downtown. It was honest work, but it didn't pay much. After Susan died, I picked up weekend work at 2 other garages just to make ends meet. I wanted Carter to have what the other kids had, especially since he'd already lost so much. The problem started when Carter got into Riverside Prep on a partial scholarship. It was one of those fancy private schools where the parking lot looked like a luxury car dealership. I was so proud when he got accepted. My son, the smart one, going to school with doctors' kids and lawyers' kids. But pride turned to worry pretty quickly. Carter would come home talking about his classmates' families, their vacation homes, their country club memberships, their fathers who wore suits to work instead of coveralls. I could see him starting to measure our life against theirs and finding it lacking. I remember the first time I felt his shame. He was 14, and I'd promised to pick him up after school instead of having him take the bus. My truck had broken down that morning, so I borrowed old Pete's tow truck from the shop. It was big and loud and had Henderson's Auto Repair painted on the side. When I pulled up to that pristine school entrance, Carter's face went red. His friends were getting into BMWs and Mercedes, and here came his dad in a beat-up tow truck with grease under his fingernails. He got in without saying a word, slumped down in the seat like he was trying to disappear. "Sorry about the truck, son. Mine's in the shop." "It's fine," he mumbled, but it wasn't fine. I could see it eating at him. The shame got worse as he got older. When parent-teacher conferences came around, Carter would beg me not to come in my work clothes. So I'd rush home, shower, and put on my one good shirt and tie. But even then, standing next to fathers in their expensive suits, I felt like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit. Carter stopped bringing friends home. When I asked why, he said it was because our house was too small or too far from everything. But I knew the real reason. He was embarrassed by where we lived, by what I did for a living, by the fact that his dad fixed cars while his friends' fathers ran companies. I worked myself to the bone to give him what I thought he needed. 3 jobs, sometimes 4 during busy seasons. I wanted him to have the school clothes that looked right, the class trips his friends took, the college prep courses that cost a fortune. Every overtime hour, every weekend shift, every time I came home exhausted and covered in grease, it was all for him. When Carter graduated valedictorian, I was the proudest father in that auditorium. He got a full scholarship to Columbia Law School. My son, the lawyer. I thought I'd done it right. I thought all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. But somewhere along the way, in those fancy schools with those wealthy kids, Carter learned to see me differently. The man who'd worked 3 jobs to pay for his education became an embarrassment. The father who'd sacrificed everything for his future became someone to hide from his new world. The first time he brought a girlfriend home from college, I saw it clearly. Rebecca was a nice girl from a good family, her father was a judge, her mother a doctor. Carter introduced me as, my father, he works with cars. Not, he's a mechanic, not, he owns his own shop by then, but, he works with cars, like he couldn't quite bring himself to say what I really did. Rebecca was polite enough, but I could see her taking in our modest house, our second-hand furniture, my work-calloused hands. Carter watched her reaction, and I watched him watching her. That's when I knew I'd lost him. Over the years, it got worse. Carter became a successful lawyer, married his first wife Lisa from a wealthy family, and slowly but surely pushed me to the edges of his life. Holiday visits became shorter. Phone calls became less frequent. I was invited to important events but kept at arm's length, like a relative you have to include but don't really want there. When Carter divorced Lisa and started dating Madison, I thought maybe things would change. But Madison came from even more money than Lisa had. Her family owned hotels, had generational wealth, moved in circles where people like me simply didn't exist. And now, sitting in my garage with $847 million in my pocket, I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. All those sacrifices I'd made, all those extra jobs I'd worked, all that money I'd spent trying to give Carter a better life, they hadn't brought us closer together. They'd driven us apart. The boy I'd raised to be successful had learned to be successful at the cost of everything I'd tried to teach him about family, loyalty, and remembering where you came from. But now I had something that would test exactly who my son really was. And for the first time in years, I was curious to see what Carter would do when he thought his embarrassing father might have something he wanted. I spent the next 3 weeks living with the biggest secret of my life. $847 million sitting in my bank account, and I told nobody. Not my neighbor Grace Chin who brought me soup when I was sick. Not my old buddy Pete from the garage. And definitely not Carter. Instead, I decided to conduct an experiment. I wanted to see how my family treated me when they thought I was just regular old Bart Thompson, the retired mechanic with nothing to offer except an embarrassing presence at their fancy events. The first test came sooner than I expected. Madison's parents were hosting some kind of charity gala downtown, and Carter called me on a Thursday evening. I hadn't heard from him since the wedding 3 weeks earlier. "Dad, hey. How are you doing?" His voice had that fake cheerful tone he used when he wanted something but was trying to sound casual about it. "I'm fine, son. How's married life treating you?" "Great, great. Listen, Dad, I have a favor to ask. Madison's parents are having this charity thing on Saturday night, and we thought, well, Madison thought maybe you'd like to come." I was surprised. This was the first time in years Carter had invited me to anything connected to his wife's family. "What kind of charity thing?" "Oh, it's for the Children's Hospital. Very worthy cause. Lots of important people will be there, judges, business leaders, that sort of crowd." And there it was. The real reason for the invitation. They needed bodies to fill the room, make the event look well attended. I was being invited as furniture, essentially. What should I wear? Well, it's formal. Black tie, actually. Do you have a tuxedo? I almost laughed. A tuxedo. Like I had tuxedos just hanging around my closet. No, Carter. I don't have a tuxedo. Oh. Well, maybe you could rent one? They have places that do that. How much does it cost to rent a tuxedo? I don't know exactly. Maybe $200? $300? $300 to rent clothes for one night so I could stand around being ignored by my son and his wife's wealthy friends. With $800 million in my bank account, $300 was nothing. But Carter didn't know that. "That's pretty expensive, son." "Right. Of course." "Well, don't worry about it then. Maybe next time." And just like that, the invitation was withdrawn. No offer to help with the cost, no suggestion that maybe the dress code could be flexible for his father. Just, maybe next time, and we both knew there wouldn't be a next time. "Actually, Carter, I'll figure something out. I'd like to come." There was a pause. I could practically hear him trying to figure out how to uninvite me without being completely obvious about it. "Are you sure, Dad? I mean, these events can be kind of boring. Lots of standing around, making small talk." I think I can handle small talk, son. So I rented the tuxedo. $350 for one night, from a place that specialized in formal wear for weddings and special occasions. When I showed up at the hotel ballroom on Saturday night, I looked as good as any man there. The tuxedo fit perfectly, my shoes were shined, and I'd even gotten a proper haircut. But from the moment I walked in, I might as well have been invisible. Carter introduced me to exactly 3 people all evening, and each introduction followed the same pattern. This is my father, Bart. No mention of what I used to do for a living, no attempt to include me in the conversation that followed. Just, this is my father, and then he'd steer the conversation away from me as quickly as possible. Madison was even worse. When I approached her to say hello, she gave me one of those air kisses that rich women do, barely making contact, and then immediately excused herself to check on the catering situation. But the worst part was watching my 17-year-old granddaughter Sophia. She was there with her boyfriend, some prep school kid whose father apparently owned half the commercial real estate downtown. When Sophia saw me, she looked genuinely happy for about 5 seconds. Then she glanced around at her friends and the happiness faded. "Hi, Grandpa," she said quietly, giving me a quick hug. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." "Thanks." Grandpa, this is Tyler." "Tyler, this is my grandfather." Tyler shook my hand with the kind of limp handshake that told me everything I needed to know about his character. "Nice to meet you, sir. What do you do?" Before I could answer, Sophia jumped in. "Grandpa used to work on cars. He's retired now." Used to work on cars. Like I'd been some part-time oil change guy instead of a master mechanic who'd run his own shop for 20 years. "Cool," Tyler said, in a tone that clearly indicated it was anything but cool. "My dad's in commercial development. Real estate." And that was the end of our conversation. Sophia spent the rest of the evening across the room from me, laughing with her friends and pretending I wasn't there. I stood in that ballroom for 3 hours, watching my family be ashamed of me while surrounded by people who wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes doing the kind of work I'd done my whole life. These were people who'd never had grease under their fingernails, never worried about making rent, never worked a weekend because they needed the overtime. But here's what really got to me. I spent the entire evening listening to these wealthy people talk about their charity work and their commitment to helping the less fortunate. They were raising money for a children's hospital, which was admirable. But not one of them had ever been less fortunate. Not one of them knew what it was like to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. I knew what it was like. I'd lived that life. And now, with more money than all of them combined, I was still being treated like I didn't belong. When the evening finally ended, Carter walked me to my truck in the parking garage. "Thanks for coming, Dad. It meant a lot to Madison's family to have you there." It was a nice lie. Madison's family hadn't spoken to me once all evening. "Sure, son. Anytime. We should do dinner soon. Just the family." Another lie. But I played along. I'd like that. As I drove home that night, still wearing that expensive rented tuxedo, I realized something important. Having money hadn't changed who I was, but it had given me clarity about who everyone else was. My family wasn't ashamed of me because I was poor. They were ashamed of me because I reminded them of where they'd come from, and they'd decided that wasn't good enough anymore. Well, I had news for them. I was about to find out exactly how much their pride was worth. 2 weeks after the charity gala, something unprecedented happened. Carter called me and asked if he could come over for lunch. Not dinner, not a quick visit, lunch. He wanted to spend actual time with me, in the middle of a workday when he usually claimed to be too busy to breathe. I'd been living with my secret for over a month now, watching how my family treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer. This unexpected invitation felt like a test I hadn't even planned. Carter showed up at my house on a Tuesday afternoon driving his BMW, dressed in one of those expensive suits that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. He looked nervous, which was unusual for him. Carter had inherited his mother's confidence, and he rarely seemed uncomfortable about anything. "Dad, this place looks great," he said, glancing around my modest living room like he was seeing it for the first time. Have you done something different? I hadn't changed a thing in 5 years, but I let it slide. Just keeping it clean. You hungry? I made some sandwiches. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd helped him with homework 30 years ago, where we'd eaten countless meals together after his mother died. For a few minutes, it almost felt like old times. Carter asked about my health, about my neighbors, about how I was spending my retirement. But I could sense something underneath his apparent interest. There was an agenda here. Dad, I want to talk to you about something, he said finally, setting down his sandwich. Madison and I have been looking at houses. That's nice. You thinking about moving? Well, the thing is, we found this perfect place. It's in Riverside Heights, great neighborhood, close to Madison's parents. The schools are excellent for when we have kids. Riverside Heights. Where the houses started at $2 million and went up from there. I waited for him to continue. The only problem is the down payment. We need about $500,000 to make the numbers work. $500,000. I had that amount in my checking account now, earning interest every day. But Carter didn't know that. That's a lot of money, son. I know. But here's the thing, I've got a big case coming up, partnership track at the firm. Madison's trust fund kicks in when she turns 30. We just need to bridge the gap for a couple of years. He was building up to something, and I had a pretty good idea what it was. Dad, I was wondering. I know you've got some savings put away. Maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement? A loan, with interest of course. You'd make money on the deal. There it was. After months of avoiding me, of being embarrassed by me, of treating me like an inconvenience, Carter wanted my money. How much are you thinking? Well, we'd need about $50,000. I know it's a lot, but I'm good for it. You know that. $50,000. Before winning the lottery, that would have been most of my life savings. My retirement security, my emergency fund, everything I'd worked 40 years to accumulate. That's pretty much everything I have, Carter. I know, and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure about paying it back. This house, Dad, it's our future. It's where Madison and I will raise our kids. Your grandchildren. The manipulation was subtle but clear. He was painting a picture of family gatherings in their beautiful new home, of grandchildren who would know their grandfather and love him. All I had to do was give him most of my life savings. For a moment, I almost fell for it. This was my son, asking for my help, treating me with more warmth and respect than I'd felt from him in years. Maybe this was the beginning of rebuilding our relationship. Maybe having a shared investment would bring us closer together. Let me think about it, I said. Of course. Take all the time you need. But Dad, this really would mean everything to us. After Carter left, I sat in my kitchen feeling something I hadn't felt in months, hope. Maybe I'd been wrong about my son. Maybe beneath all the embarrassment and social climbing, there was still the boy who used to run to me when he had problems. Maybe this was his way of reaching out, of saying he trusted me and valued my place in his life. I spent the rest of the afternoon imagining how things might change between us. Carter would be grateful for my help, would invite me to their new house, would include me in their lives in a meaningful way. We'd have family dinners in their fancy dining room, and maybe his wife would finally see me as more than just an embarrassing relative to be tolerated. That evening, I was seriously considering telling Carter about the lottery. Not all of it, that would be too much too fast, but maybe I could say I'd come into some unexpected money. Enough to help with the house and still have plenty left over for both of us. I was reaching for the phone to call him when I heard voices from next door. Carter's BMW was still parked in front of my house, but he wasn't inside. He was standing in Mrs. Chen's driveway, talking on his cell phone. The windows were open, and sound carried. No, Madison, it's going fine. He's actually considering it. I moved closer to the window, staying out of sight. Look, it's just for a few weeks. I'll be the perfect son, ask about his health, pretend I care about his boring retirement stories. Whatever it takes to get the money. My blood went cold. 50,000 should be plenty for the down payment bridge loan from your dad. Then we can pay the old man back and I won't have to pretend anymore. He was laughing now, actually laughing about manipulating me. Trust me, he's lonely and desperate for attention. He'll give me the money just to feel like he's part of my life again. It's almost too easy. I stood there in my kitchen, listening to my son plot to take my life savings by exploiting my love for him. The hope I'd felt just hours earlier turned to something cold and hard in my chest. Carter finished his call and drove away without coming back inside to say goodbye. He'd gotten what he'd come for, the promise that I'd consider his request. Now he could go home to his wife and plan how to spend money they thought they were about to steal from a lonely old man. That night, I made a decision. I was going to give Carter exactly what he was asking for. I was going to show him the kind of father he thought I was, desperate, lonely, and easily manipulated. But I was also going to make sure he learned exactly what that kind of manipulation cost. The game had changed. Now I wasn't just testing my family's character. I was planning to teach them a lesson about the difference between love and greed. I spent the next week playing the role Carter expected me to play. I called him twice, sounding eager and grateful that he'd asked for my help. I mentioned how nice it had been to spend time together, how I was looking forward to being more involved in his life. I could practically hear him smiling through the phone, confident that his manipulation was working perfectly. But while Carter thought he was playing me, I was conducting my own investigation. With $800 million at my disposal, I could afford to hire the best private investigator in the state. His name was Marcus Webb, and he specialized in financial backgrounds and family situations. I told him I needed to know everything about my son's life, his debts, his marriage, his real situation. What Marcus uncovered over those 7 days changed everything I thought I knew about Carter's life. First, the house in Riverside Heights was real, but it wasn't the family dream Carter had painted. The truth was much uglier. Carter had been lying to Madison's parents about his financial situation for over a year. He'd been telling them he was up for partner at his law firm, that his income was double what it actually was, that he was already approved for a mortgage he'd never even applied for. Madison's father, Richard Whitmore, had made it clear that he expected his daughter to maintain a certain lifestyle. He'd offered to help with the house purchase, but only if Carter could prove he was financially stable enough to make the marriage work long-term. The $50,000 he wanted from me wasn't for a down payment, it was to fake bank statements and create the appearance of savings he didn't have. But that wasn't the worst of it. Marcus also discovered that Carter had been telling people stories about me for years. Not just the basic embarrassment about my profession, but elaborate lies designed to explain why his family never saw me, why I wasn't part of their social circle. He'd told Madison's parents that I had drinking problems. According to Carter's version of events, I was an unreliable alcoholic who'd become bitter and difficult in my old age. He'd painted me as someone who'd neglected him after his mother died, someone who'd been too wrapped up in my own problems to be a proper father. To his co-workers at the law firm, I was a different kind of problem. Carter had told them I was becoming senile, that I sometimes showed up at his office making scenes, that he was struggling to decide whether to put me in a care facility. He'd positioned himself as the long-suffering son dealing with an embarrassing, deteriorating father. The most painful discovery came from Marcus's conversation with Carter's first wife, Lisa. They'd divorced 3 years ago, and she had no reason to protect Carter's reputation anymore. She told Marcus that Carter used to complain constantly about having to visit me, about how my modest lifestyle reflected poorly on his professional image. He used to say his father was like an anchor dragging him down, Lisa had told Marcus. Every time there was a work function where spouses and families were invited, Carter would stress about what excuse to make for why his father couldn't attend. But the detail that really got to me was what Lisa said about Carter's attitude toward my sacrifices. She told Marcus that Carter had once described my years of working multiple jobs as pathetic overcompensation. He told her that I'd never understood that money couldn't buy class, that all my efforts to give him advantages had just highlighted how out of place our family was in upper-class circles. According to Lisa, Carter genuinely believed that I'd held him back in life. He saw my work ethic and sacrifices not as love, but as evidence of low expectations and small thinking. When Marcus finished his report, I sat in my living room holding a folder full of evidence that my son didn't just take me for granted, he actively resented me. Every holiday visit, every phone call, every moment I'd thought we were maintaining some kind of relationship had been an act of charity on his part, a burden he'd been carrying out of obligation. The phone rang while I was processing all this information. It was Carter, right on schedule. "Dad, hey. Have you had a chance to think about what we discussed?" "I have, son. I want to help you." "Really? Dad, that's wonderful. Madison is going to be so excited. There's just one thing I need to clarify. This 50,000, it's really important to you?" "Absolutely. It's the difference between getting our dream house and having to settle for something less. This house, Dad, it's where we're going to build our life together." I almost laughed at the irony. Here he was, spinning the same fantasy about our closer relationship, while I had a folder full of evidence showing exactly what he really thought of me. "Well then, I'm happy to help. Why don't you come over tomorrow and we can work out the details?" "That's perfect, Dad. And hey, thank you. This really means a lot to me." After hanging up, I called Marcus Webb and asked him to do one more thing. I wanted him to follow Carter for the next 24 hours. I wanted to know exactly what my son did and said between now and when he came to collect what he thought was my life savings. The next morning, Marcus called with his report. "Your son went straight home and told his wife the good news. Then he called his father-in-law and said he'd secured the additional funds needed for the house purchase. But here's the interesting part, he also called someone else." "Who?" "A financial advisor. Apparently, Carter has been planning to invest your 50,000 in some high-risk venture. He's not using it for the house at all. He's planning to gamble with it, hoping to turn it into enough money to actually afford the lifestyle he's been pretending to have." So not only was Carter lying about needing the money for a house, he was planning to risk my life savings on some get-rich-quick scheme. If his investment failed, I'd never see a penny of my money again. And based on his track record with money, failure seemed like the most likely outcome. That afternoon, Carter arrived at my house carrying a briefcase and wearing his most sincere expression. He hugged me, actually hugged me, for the first time in years. "Dad, I can't tell you how much this means to me. To us. I'm just happy I can help, son." He had papers with him, official-looking documents that outlined the terms of our loan agreement. Everything was spelled out, the $50,000 amount, the repayment schedule, even the interest rate he'd pay me. "I want everything to be professional," he said. "This is business between family, but it's still business." As I looked at those papers, I realized Carter had put more effort into planning this manipulation than he'd put into our relationship in the past 5 years. Every detail was calculated to make me feel important, valued, trusted. But I had a few surprises of my own planned. "Before we finalize this, Carter, I want to ask you something." "Of course. Anything. Do you really think this will bring us closer together? Working together on something important like this?" His smile was perfect, practiced, completely fake. "Absolutely, Dad. This is just the beginning. Once Madison and I are settled in the new house, we'll have you over all the time. Sunday dinners, holidays, everything. We want you to be a real part of our lives." I nodded and signed the papers, then wrote him a check for $50,000. Carter's relief was palpable as he folded the check and put it in his wallet. "Dad, you won't regret this. I promise." "Oh, I know I won't regret it, son. But I think you might." After Carter left with my check, something interesting happened. The phone calls stopped. The texts became brief and businesslike. The warm, caring son who'd been so grateful for my help vanished as quickly as he'd appeared. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Then I got a single text message, "Hey Dad, money transferred successfully. Thanks again. Talk soon. Talk soon." That was 3 weeks ago. Marcus Webb called me with updates on how Carter was spending what he thought was my life savings. True to form, my son had lied about everything. He hadn't used the money for a house down payment. Instead, he'd invested $40,000 in some cryptocurrency scheme his law school buddy had pitched him. The remaining $10,000 went to pay off credit cards he'd maxed out trying to maintain his lifestyle. Within 10 days, the cryptocurrency investment had lost 60% of its value. By the end of the month, it was worthless. Carter had gambled away $40,000 of what he believed was my retirement money, and he hadn't said a word to me about it. I spent those weeks in a strange kind of isolation. I'd given my son exactly what he'd asked for, and in return, I'd gotten exactly what I'd always gotten from him, nothing. But now I knew it was intentional. This wasn't neglect or busy schedules. This was Carter getting what he wanted and discarding me until he needed something else. The loneliness during those weeks was different from anything I'd experienced since Susan died. When you lose a spouse, the grief is terrible but clean. You know why you're alone, and you know the person you lost loved you. This was different. This was the isolation that comes from realizing that someone you'd spent your whole life loving had never really loved you back. I found myself talking to Susan's photograph more than usual during this time. Her picture sat on the mantel in our living room, the same spot it had occupied since the funeral 26 years ago. "I think I failed, Susie," I told her one evening. "I think I raised a stranger." The house felt enormous and empty in ways it never had before. Every room held memories of Carter growing up, the kitchen where I'd made him breakfast before school, the living room where we'd watched baseball games, the garage where I'd taught him to change oil and check tire pressure. But those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now, some other father who'd raised some other child. I kept thinking about all the choices I'd made over the years. Working those extra jobs to pay for Carter's private school. Using my savings to help with his college expenses even after he'd gotten the scholarship. Buying him a car for graduation when he'd complained that taking the bus was embarrassing. Every sacrifice I'd made had been motivated by love, but also by hope. Hope that giving Carter opportunities I'd never had would somehow make him happy. Hope that success would fulfill him in ways that my own simple life never could. Hope that all the money I spent and hours I worked would translate into a closer relationship between us. But I'd been wrong about everything. The opportunities hadn't made Carter grateful, they'd made him entitled. The success hadn't brought him happiness, it had brought him anxiety about maintaining appearances. And all my sacrifices hadn't brought us closer, they just highlighted the differences between the man I was and the man he wanted his father to be. During the 4th week of silence from Carter, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to Forest Lawn Cemetery where Susan was buried, and I sat by her grave for 2 hours, having the conversation I should have had with her years ago. "I think I've been mourning the wrong loss," I told her headstone. "I've been so focused on missing the son Carter used to be that I never accepted who he actually became." The October wind was cold, and the cemetery was nearly empty. Just me and Susan and 26 years of conversations I'd been having with a ghost instead of dealing with reality. "He's not a bad person, Susie. But he's not my person either. And I think I've been making both of us miserable by pretending otherwise." I thought about the $800 million sitting in my bank accounts, earning more interest every day than Carter made in a year. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, but the one thing I'd always wanted, a real relationship with my son, was the one thing money couldn't buy. That evening, I made 2 phone calls that changed the direction of my life. The first was to Grace Chen, my 74-year-old neighbor who'd been bringing me soup and checking on me since Susan died. Grace had immigrated from Taiwan 50 years ago with nothing but determination and hope. She'd raised 3 children as a single mother, worked 2 jobs for decades, and somehow managed to maintain a positive outlook that I envied. "Grace, I need to ask you something. Do you think it's possible to love someone who doesn't love you back?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that hit me harder than any revelation Marcus Webb had uncovered. "Bart, love is not transaction. You not love Carter because you expect love back. You love Carter because he is your son. But you also need to love yourself enough to accept truth about relationship. The second call was to Marcus Webb. "Marcus, I want you to expand your investigation. I don't just want to know about Carter anymore. I want to know about my granddaughter Sophia. I want to know about Madison. I want to understand the whole family dynamic. What exactly are you looking for? I want to know if there's anyone in my family who actually cares about me, or if I've been living in a fantasy for the past 20 years. The answer to that question would determine what I did with the rest of my life. And with $800 million at my disposal, the rest of my life could be very interesting indeed. But first, I needed to know the truth about everyone. Not just Carter, but the whole family I'd been trying so hard to be part of. Because if I was going to make decisions about my fortune, I wanted to make sure those decisions were based on reality, not on the hopes and dreams of a lonely old man who'd been fooling himself for far too long. Marcus Webb's expanded investigation took 3 weeks to complete, and what he uncovered painted a picture of my family that was both better and worse than I'd imagined. The worst news was about Carter. Not only had he lost most of my $50,000, but he'd also taken out a second mortgage on his current house to cover his gambling debts. He was drowning financially, but still maintaining the facade of success for Madison's family. He'd started borrowing money from colleagues at his law firm, telling them elaborate stories about temporary cash flow problems. But the most devastating discovery was a conversation Marcus had recorded between Carter and his friend Derek from law school. They were at a bar downtown, and Carter had been drinking. "You know what the problem is with my father?" Carter had said. "He thinks working hard is some kind of virtue. Like there's honor in coming home covered in grease and smelling like motor oil. But didn't he put you through school? That's what makes it worse. He sacrificed everything to give me opportunities, and then he expects me to be grateful for a childhood of second-hand clothes and macaroni dinners. Like his poverty was some gift he was giving me." Marcus had played me the recording, and hearing my son's voice saying those words was worse than reading any report. "The truth is," Carter had continued, "he held me back. Every school event where other kids' parents showed up in nice cars and expensive clothes, there was my dad in his work boots and Walmart shirts. Do you know how hard it is to build a professional reputation when people know your father was a mechanic?" But Marcus had also uncovered some surprises that gave me hope. Madison, my daughter-in-law who I'd written off as a social climber, wasn't what she appeared to be either. She came from money, yes, but she'd grown up watching her father Richard Whitmore treat service workers like they were invisible. According to Marcus's sources, Madison had always been uncomfortable with her family's elitist attitudes. More importantly, Madison had been asking Carter for months why they never visited me, why I wasn't included in family gatherings. She'd specifically suggested having me over for dinner several times, and Carter had always made excuses. Madison didn't know about Carter's lies regarding my supposed drinking problem or mental decline. The biggest revelation was about Sophia, my 17-year-old granddaughter. Marcus had followed her for several days and discovered something remarkable. Every Tuesday after school, Sophia had been volunteering at a community center in my old neighborhood, teaching basic car maintenance to single mothers who couldn't afford expensive repairs. When Marcus asked around about her, the coordinator at the community center had nothing but praise for Sophia's work ethic and compassion. "That girl has a gift for connecting with people," the woman had told Marcus. "She never talks down to anyone, never acts like she's doing charity work. She treats everyone like family." Even more interesting, Sophia had been using the car maintenance skills I'd taught her years ago, back when she was 12 and curious about how engines worked. She'd remembered everything I'd shown her, and she was passing that knowledge on to people who really needed it. But the detail that really got to me was what Sophia had told one of the women she was helping. Marcus had overheard her explaining how to check oil levels, and when the woman thanked her, Sophia had said, "My grandfather taught me this. He's the smartest man I know, even if my dad doesn't see it that way." Armed with this new information, I developed a plan that would test each member of my family individually, without Carter's influence affecting their responses. First, I needed to separate Madison from Carter's version of events. I decided to create a situation where she would have to interact with me directly, without Carter present to guide her reactions. I called Madison's office. She worked as an interior designer for high-end clients, and posed as a potential customer. Using a fake name, I scheduled a consultation for a major home renovation project with a budget of $2 million. When Madison arrived at the address I'd given her, a property I'd purchased the week before through a shell company, she found me waiting in work clothes, supposedly the contractor overseeing the renovation. "Hi, I'm Madison Whitmore. I have an appointment to meet with Mr. Johnson about an interior design project. He's not here yet, but he asked me to show you around. I'm Bart, the general contractor." For the next hour, I watched Madison interact with me when she thought I was just a working-class contractor. Her behavior was professional, respectful, and genuinely warm. She asked about my experience, listened to my suggestions about structural elements, and treated me like an expert whose opinion mattered. When she complimented my knowledge of home construction, I mentioned that I'd learned a lot of it from my son-in-law who was a mechanic. "Really? That's wonderful. I think people who work with their hands have such valuable skills. My father-in-law was a mechanic, actually, and he's one of the smartest people I know." "My father-in-law." She was talking about me, not knowing I was standing right in front of her. "Your husband must be proud of his father." Madison's expression changed slightly. "Well, it's complicated. Carter loves his father, but I think he sometimes feels like their worlds are very different. I keep telling him we should have his dad over for dinner more often." When I didn't show up for the rest of the consultation, Madison left her card and a note apologizing for Mr. Johnson's absence. She never found out that the mysterious client was her own father-in-law. Next, I tested Sophia. I arranged to run into her at the community center where she volunteered, pretending I was there to donate some old tools. "Grandpa? What are you doing here? I heard about this program where they teach car maintenance. Thought maybe they could use some tools I'm not using anymore." Sophia's face lit up. "That's perfect. I help run that program. Grandpa, I've been using everything you taught me. Remember when you showed me how to change spark plugs?" For the next 2 hours, I watched my granddaughter work with confidence and compassion, teaching skills I'd passed down to her to people who needed them desperately. When I mentioned that her father probably didn't know about her volunteer work, her expression darkened. "Dad thinks this kind of work is beneath me. He says I should focus on activities that will look good on college applications. And what do you think? I think helping people is more important than impressing college admissions officers. Besides, I like working with my hands. I like solving problems. I guess I got that from you." The final test was the most important one. I needed to know how Carter would react when faced with a real crisis involving my well-being. So I staged one. Using Marcus Webb's connections, I arranged for Carter to receive a call from St. Mary's Hospital saying that I'd been brought in after collapsing at home. The caller explained that I was conscious but confused, and that I'd been asking for my son. Carter's response told me everything I needed to know about his true feelings. He didn't rush to the hospital. He didn't even call immediately. According to Marcus, who was monitoring Carter's phone, my son's first call was to Madison to complain about the inconvenience of having to deal with my health scare. His second call was to his office to reschedule a meeting. Carter didn't arrive at the hospital until 3 hours after receiving the call. When he finally showed up and found out there had been a miscommunication and I wasn't actually there, his relief was obvious. "Thank God," he told the nurse. "I was afraid I'd have to deal with, well, you know how these situations can get complicated." By the time Carter left the hospital, I knew exactly where I stood with each member of my family. I also knew exactly what I was going to do about it. The game was almost over, but I had one more move to make. While I'd been testing my family's character, Marcus Webb had been digging deeper into Carter's financial situation. What he uncovered was so much worse than I'd imagined that I had to read his report twice to believe it. Carter wasn't just struggling with money, he was drowning in debt that went back years. The $50,000 he'd taken from me was barely a drop in the ocean of his financial problems. It started with the cryptocurrency investment that had wiped out $40,000 of my money. But Marcus discovered that wasn't Carter's first venture into high-risk investments. Over the past 3 years, he'd been borrowing money from various sources to fund increasingly desperate get-rich-quick schemes. He'd taken out personal loans, maxed out credit cards, and even borrowed against his law firm's retirement plan. The total debt was staggering, almost $2 million spread across 17 different creditors. But the most shocking discovery was how Carter had been hiding this from Madison and her family. He'd been forging bank statements, creating fake investment portfolios, and maintaining multiple sets of financial records. Madison genuinely believed they were financially secure because Carter had been showing her doctor documents for over a year. Marcus had traced some of the more recent loans, and the details made my blood run cold. Carter had borrowed money from people who weren't banks or legitimate financial institutions. Some of these loans came with the kind of terms that resulted in broken legs when payments were missed. The pressure had been building for months. Richard Whitmore, Madison's father, had been making increasingly specific inquiries about Carter's finances. He'd hired his own investigators to do background checks on his son-in-law, and Carter knew it was only a matter of time before his lies were exposed. That's when Marcus uncovered Carter's most desperate plan yet. My son had been systematically researching my financial situation, trying to figure out exactly how much money I had. He'd contacted my bank using forged authorization forms, claiming he was worried about my mental capacity and needed to monitor my accounts for signs of financial confusion. When the bank refused to provide information without proper legal documentation, Carter had started exploring other options. Marcus discovered that Carter had been consulting with an elder law attorney about the process of having me declared mentally incompetent. The plan was chilling in its calculation. Carter intended to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist who specialized in age-related cognitive decline. He'd been documenting what he claimed were signs of my deteriorating mental state, instances where I'd supposedly been confused during phone conversations, times when I'd apparently forgotten important information. None of it was true, but Carter had been building a case file for months. If he could convince a court that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs, he could be appointed as my financial guardian. That would give him complete control over my money and property. The timeline was terrifying. Carter had already filed preliminary paperwork with the court. He was planning to initiate guardianship proceedings within the next month, right around the time when Madison's father would be completing his background investigation. But there was one detail that made Carter's betrayal even more personal. Marcus had discovered that Carter had been using my own words against me in his documentation. He'd been recording our phone conversations for months, then editing them to make me sound confused or forgetful. That conversation where I'd asked him to repeat an address because I hadn't heard him clearly? Carter had edited it to make it sound like I couldn't remember where I lived. The time I'd paused during a phone call because I was trying to remember the name of a neighbor's dog? In Carter's version, I was struggling to remember my own neighbor's name. My son had turned my trust into a weapon against me. Marcus also uncovered Carter's backup plan if the guardianship scheme didn't work. He'd been researching nursing homes and assisted living facilities, preparing to argue that I needed to be moved into care for my own safety. Once I was in a facility, it would be much easier to gain control of my finances and property. The most damning evidence was a conversation Marcus had recorded between Carter and the elder law attorney. They were discussing strategy for the guardianship hearing, and Carter's true feelings about me came through clearly. "The old man is stubborn, but he's not stupid," Carter had said. "We need to move fast before he figures out what's happening. Once I have control of his accounts, I can pay off my debts and start fresh." "And your father? What happens to him after the guardianship is established?" "That's not really my problem. He'll be taken care of in whatever facility we choose. It's probably better for him anyway. He's been living alone too long, and he's obviously not making good decisions with his money." The attorney had asked what Carter meant by not making good decisions. "He loaned me $50,000 without even asking what it was for." That's exactly the kind of impaired judgment that proves he needs a guardian. So my willingness to help my son when he asked for money was being used as evidence that I was mentally incompetent. The loan Carter had manipulated me into giving him was now proof that I couldn't be trusted with my own finances. Reading this report, I realized that everything I'd experienced over the past few months, Carter's sudden interest in spending time with me, his requests for money, even his apparent gratitude, had all been part of an elaborate plan to steal everything I owned. my son wasn't just embarrassed by me or taking me for granted. He was actively plotting to destroy my independence and take control of my life. But Carter had made one crucial mistake in his planning. He'd based his entire scheme on the assumption that I was a lonely, confused old man with modest savings and no one to protect my interests. What he didn't know was that I had $800 million and my own investigator who'd been documenting every step of his plan. The student was about to become the teacher, and the lesson I was planning would be one Carter would never forget. Marcus had given me copies of everything: the forged documents, the recorded conversations, the correspondence with the attorney. I had enough evidence to send Carter to prison for fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft. But prison was too easy. I wanted Carter to understand exactly what he'd lost, exactly what his greed and betrayal had cost him. I wanted him to experience the same helplessness and betrayal that he'd been planning to inflict on me. And I knew exactly how to do it. While Marcus continued documenting Carter's schemes, I decided it was time to have a real conversation with Madison. Not as a potential client or a stranger at a fake job site, but as her father-in-law who needed to understand where she really stood in all of this. I called her office and asked if she could meet me for coffee. I could hear the surprise in her voice. In 3 years of marriage to Carter, we'd never had a one-on-one conversation that lasted more than 5 minutes. Of course, Bart. Is everything okay? Carter's been saying you've been, well, that you might be having some health concerns. Health concerns? So Carter had already started planting seeds about my supposed mental decline with his wife. I'm fine, Madison. I just think it's time we got to know each other better. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where Madison looked slightly out of place in her designer clothes but tried not to show it. She ordered a complicated coffee drink that cost more than I used to spend on lunch, but her nervousness was obvious. Bart, I have to admit, I'm a little confused about why you wanted to meet. Carter said you'd been having some memory issues lately, and I wasn't sure. What exactly did Carter tell you about my memory issues? Madison shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Well, he said you'd been forgetting things. Important things. He was worried about you living alone. What kind of things? He said you called him last week asking about your neighbor's name, someone you'd known for years. And that you'd gotten confused about directions to places you'd been going to your whole life. Every word she repeated was a twisted version of something Carter had recorded and edited. He'd been systematically building a case against me with his own wife, preparing her to support his guardianship petition. Madison, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think I seem confused or forgetful right now? She studied my face carefully. No. No, you seem perfectly sharp. But Carter said that these things come and go with age-related. I mean, he said. He said what? That you have good days and bad days. That on your bad days, you don't even remember conversations you had the day before. I pulled out my phone and showed Madison the recording app. Madison, I'm going to record our conversation right now. I want you to listen to how I sound, how I respond to questions, whether I seem confused about anything. For the next 20 minutes, I had a completely normal conversation with my daughter-in-law. I asked her about her work, her family, her hopes for the future. I remembered details about her parents, her college education, even the name of her childhood dog that she'd mentioned once at a family dinner 2 years ago. Bart, you seem completely normal to me. More than normal, you seem sharper than most people half your age. Then why do you think Carter has been telling you I'm having memory problems? Madison was quiet for a long time, and I could see her working through the implications of my question. I don't know. Maybe he's worried about things that aren't really there. Sometimes people see problems where they don't exist because they're scared of losing someone. Or maybe Carter has been lying to you about my mental state for reasons that have nothing to do with concern for my well-being. The color drained from Madison's face. What are you saying? I made a decision that surprised even me. I decided to tell Madison part of the truth. Madison, I know about Carter's financial problems. I know about the debts, the gambling, the money he's borrowed from dangerous people. She stared at me in shock. How do you? Carter said our finances were fine. He showed me our investment statements just last month. Those statements were fake. Carter has been forging financial documents to hide the fact that he's nearly $2 million in debt. Madison's hand started shaking. That's impossible. Bart, I think you might be confused about. I pulled out a folder containing some of Marcus's findings and set it on the table between us. Bank records, loan documents, credit card statements, all with Carter's name on them. Look at the dates, Madison. Look at the amounts. Your husband has been living a double life for over a year. As Madison read through the documents, I watched her face go through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, fear, and finally, a kind of devastated understanding. He borrowed money from these people? These names, some of these don't even look like real companies. They're not. Some of Carter's creditors are the kind of people who collect debts with violence. Madison set the papers down and covered her face with her hands. Oh God. The house in Riverside Heights. He said we were approved for the mortgage, said we just needed to wait for some paperwork to clear. Madison, you were never approved for any mortgage. Carter has been stalling, hoping to find a way to pay off enough debt to qualify for legitimate financing. The $50,000 he borrowed from you was supposed to be invested in some cryptocurrency scheme that would magically solve all his problems. Instead, he lost most of it in 2 weeks. Madison started crying then, not the delicate tears of a woman trying to protect her makeup, but the deep, wrenching sobs of someone whose entire world was collapsing. I believed him. Every lie, every fake document, every excuse. I actually believed we were building a life together. Madison, there's something else you need to know. Carter has been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can gain control of my finances. She looked up at me with horror. What? All those stories about my memory problems? They're part of a legal strategy. Carter's been recording our conversations and editing them to make me sound confused. He's planning to use your testimony about my supposed cognitive decline to support his guardianship petition. I would never. Bart, I had no idea. I thought Carter was genuinely concerned about you. I know you did. And that's why I'm telling you this instead of just letting Carter's plan play out. Madison wiped her eyes and tried to compose herself. What happens now? If Carter's in debt to dangerous people, if he's been planning to steal from you, what am I supposed to do? I reached across the table and took her hand. Madison, you're not your husband. Carter made these choices, not you. And you have options. What kind of options? You can choose to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. You can help me protect myself from Carter's schemes, and in return, I'll help you protect yourself from the consequences of his actions. Madison stared at me for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Carter always made you sound like someone who was holding him back. Someone who didn't understand his ambitions or support his goals. And what do you think now? I think Carter has been lying to me about a lot more than just money. That afternoon, Madison and I talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own background, about growing up with wealth but feeling disconnected from her family's values. She genuinely believed that Carter's love for her was separate from his interest in her family's money. I thought I'd found someone who loved me for myself, she said. But now I'm wondering if Carter ever saw me as anything more than access to my father's connections and money. Madison stared at me for a long moment. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Carter always made you sound like someone who was holding him back. Someone who didn't understand his ambitions or support his goals. And what do you think now? I think Carter has been lying to me about a lot more than just money. That afternoon, Madison and I talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own background, about growing up with wealth but feeling disconnected from her family's values. She genuinely believed that Carter's love for her was separate from his interest in her family's money. I thought I'd found someone who loved me for myself, she said. But now I'm wondering if Carter ever saw me as anything more than access to my father's connections and money. Madison, you're young and smart and talented. Whatever happens with Carter, you'll survive this. Will I? My father's investigators are going to uncover everything. When they find out about Carter's debts, about the lies, I'll be humiliated. My family will think I'm an idiot for not seeing through him. Your family will think you're brave for facing the truth when you discovered it. As we said goodbye that evening, Madison made me a promise that changed everything. Bart, I won't be part of Carter's plan against you. Whatever he's plotting, whatever he's told me to say or do, I won't be part of it. Thank you, Madison. And Bart? I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not making more effort to know you, for not questioning Carter's stories about you. You deserved better from your family. That night, I realized that I'd been wrong about Madison. She wasn't a gold digger or a social climber. She was a young woman who'd been manipulated by the same man who'd been manipulating me. In her own way, she was as much a victim of Carter's lies as I was. But she was also something else, she was an ally. And in the battle that was coming, I was going to need all the allies I could get. 3 days after my conversation with Madison, something happened that put everything into perspective for me. My neighbor Grace Chin knocked on my door at 7 in the morning, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking as she held an official-looking envelope. Bart, I'm sorry to bother you so early, but I don't know what to do. Grace had been my neighbor for 15 years. She was the kind of woman who brought soup when you were sick, who shoveled your driveway when you were out of town, who never asked for anything in return. When Susan died, Grace had been the one who sat with me during the first terrible weeks, not saying much, just being present when words weren't enough. What's wrong, Grace? She handed me the envelope with trembling fingers. It was a foreclosure notice. The bank was taking her house. I don't understand all the legal words, but they say I have 30 days. 30 days to find $67,000 or they take my house. Grace led me to her kitchen table, where she had stacks of medical bills, insurance statements, and bank notices spread out like evidence of a crime. Her husband James had died 8 months ago after a long battle with cancer, and the medical expenses had been devastating. James had good insurance, we thought. But there were so many things they didn't cover. Experimental treatments, special medications, the private care facility when he couldn't stay at home anymore. I sat down across from her, looking at bills that totaled over $200,000. Grace had been paying what she could each month, but the mortgage had fallen behind while she struggled to keep up with the medical debt. Grace, why didn't you tell me things were this bad? What could you do? You're retired, living on fixed income like me. I didn't want to burden you with my problems. Here was this woman who'd spent decades helping everyone around her, and when she was drowning, she couldn't bring herself to ask for help because she didn't want to be a burden. Meanwhile, my own son was planning to steal my life savings while lying about his concern for my well-being. Have you talked to the bank? Asked about payment plans or loan modification? They said my income is too low to qualify for any programs. Without James's pension, I only have Social Security. It's not enough to cover the mortgage and the medical payments. Grace had worked as a seamstress for 40 years, taking care of her family while her husband worked construction. They'd never made much money, but they'd been happy and they'd paid their bills on time for decades. Now, because James had gotten sick and needed care that insurance wouldn't fully cover, Grace was going to lose everything. Where will you go? My daughter in Seattle said I could move in with her family. But Bart, this house. James and I bought it when we got married. We raised our children here. All my memories are here. I looked around Grace's kitchen, with its worn linoleum floors and outdated appliances. The house probably wasn't worth much more than the debt against it, but it was her home. It was where she'd built a life with the man she loved, where she'd raised 3 children who'd all grown up to be successful, contributing members of society. Grace, what if I told you there might be another option? What do you mean? I made a decision that felt more right than anything I'd done in months. I was going to tell Grace about the lottery winnings. Not all of it, that would be too overwhelming, but enough to help her understand that her problems could be solved. Grace, I need to tell you something, and I need you to promise to keep it between us. Of course. I came into some money recently. More money than I ever expected to have. And I want to help you save your house. Grace stared at me with confusion. Bart, I can't take money from you. You don't have $67,000 to spare. Actually, I do. And Grace, this isn't charity. You've been taking care of me and everyone else in this neighborhood for years. When Susan was sick, you drove her to doctor appointments when I couldn't get off work. After she died, you made sure I didn't starve or drink myself to death. You've earned this help 100 times over. Tears started flowing down Grace's cheeks again. I don't understand. Where did you get this kind of money? I won the lottery, Grace. A big lottery. Big enough that helping you won't even make a dent in what I have. Grace sat back in her chair, trying to process what I'd told her. You won the lottery? When? How much? A few weeks ago. And let's just say it was enough to change my life completely. But why haven't you told anyone? Why are you still living in your old house, driving your old truck? I thought about how to explain the past few weeks, the testing, the discoveries about my family, the plans Carter had been making. Because I wanted to see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer. And Grace, you've been the same wonderful person to me whether you thought I had money or not. Grace was crying harder now, but they were different tears. Relief, gratitude, and something else, the knowledge that someone had seen her kindness and valued it. Bart, I can't accept this. It's too much. Grace represented everything my son Carter had failed to understand. She proved that real relationships weren't built on what you could get from someone, but on what you were willing to give. She showed me that family wasn't about obligation or inheritance or social status, it was about showing up for each other when it mattered. Helping Grace wasn't just the right thing to do. It was a reminder of who I wanted to be and how I wanted to use my unexpected fortune. Not to impress people who already looked down on me, but to help people who'd shown me genuine friendship. As I walked home that night, I felt lighter than I had in months. Carter could keep planning his schemes and plotting to steal what he thought I had. But I'd already found something worth more than money, I'd found real family. 2 weeks after helping Grace, something happened that I wasn't prepared for. My granddaughter Sophia appeared at my front door on a Saturday morning, but she wasn't the composed teenager I was used to seeing at family gatherings. Her eyes were red from crying, her hair was disheveled, and she was carrying a backpack that looked like it had been packed in a hurry. Grandpa, I need to talk to you. I brought her inside and made her some hot chocolate, the way I used to when she was little and would visit with her mother before the divorce. Sophia sat at my kitchen table, trying to compose herself, but I could see she was struggling with something big. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Are you okay? Grandpa, I found something. Something about Dad that I wasn't supposed to see. My heart started pounding. Had Sophia discovered Carter's plans against me? Had she learned about his financial problems? What did you find? Sophia pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. Dad left his laptop open yesterday, and I saw these messages between him and some lawyer. They were talking about you, Grandpa. About trying to prove you're not mentally competent. I read the messages, recognizing the conversation Marcus had already uncovered. But seeing the shock and betrayal on Sophia's face made Carter's plan feel even more vicious. Grandpa, they're planning to take your house, your money, everything. Dad was bragging about how easy it would be because you trust him. How much did you read? Enough to know that my father is a liar and a thief. Sophia's voice cracked with emotion. Grandpa, he's been recording your phone calls and editing them to make you sound confused. He's been telling people you're losing your memory. I sat down across from her, trying to figure out how much truth a 17-year-old could handle. Sophia, what made you look at your father's computer? I wasn't snooping, I swear. I was borrowing his laptop to work on a school project, and the messages just popped up. But once I started reading, I couldn't stop. Sophia wiped her eyes and looked at me with an expression that reminded me painfully of her grandmother Susan. Grandpa, there's something else. Something I need to tell you that I've never told anyone. What is it, sweetheart? I've always known Dad was ashamed of you. Even when I was little, I could see how he acted different when you were around his friends. And I hated it. The pain in her voice was raw and honest. When I was 12, remember how you taught me about car engines? How you showed me how to change oil and check spark plugs? I remember. You were so curious about how everything worked. Dad found out and told me I wasn't allowed to learn that stuff anymore. He said it wasn't appropriate for someone in our family to know about manual labor. He made it sound like working with your hands was something to be ashamed of. I felt a familiar ache in my chest, the same pain I'd been carrying for years as I watched Carter distance himself from everything I represented. But you kept volunteering at the community center, teaching car maintenance. Sophia looked surprised. How did you know about that? I make it my business to know what's important to the people I love. Dad doesn't know about the volunteer work. I told him I was doing tutoring for my college applications. If he knew I was teaching car repair to single mothers in your old neighborhood, he'd probably disown me. Sophia reached into her backpack and pulled out a folder full of photos. Pictures of her working under the hood of cars, teaching women how to change their own oil, explaining how to check tire pressure and fluid levels. Grandpa, these women can't afford to take their cars to expensive mechanics. Some of them are working 2 jobs just to pay rent. When their cars break down, they might lose their jobs because they can't get to work. I looked at the pictures of my granddaughter, covered in grease and grinning as she helped people who really needed it, and I felt prouder than I had in years. You're teaching them skills that could save them hundreds of dollars. Exactly. And it's all because of what you taught me. You gave me something valuable, something I could pass on to help other people. Sophia set the photos aside and looked me directly in the eyes. Grandpa, I can't live with people who think helping others is beneath them. I can't be part of a family that treats you like you're an embarrassment. What are you saying, Sophia? I want to come live with you. At least until I graduate and go to college. I can't watch Dad try to steal from you while pretending he's doing it out of love. The request caught me completely off guard. Having Sophia live with me would complicate everything I was planning. It would also put her in the middle of a family war that was about to get very ugly. Sweetheart, that's a big decision. And it would cause serious problems with your father. Good. Dad needs to face some consequences for his actions. Sophia, there are things about this situation that you don't understand yet. Things that are going to get complicated very soon. Like what? I made another decision that surprised me. I decided to tell my granddaughter the truth about the lottery, about my investigation into Carter's schemes, about the plan I was developing to protect myself and teach her father a lesson. Sophia, your grandfather isn't the helpless old man your father thinks he is. For the next hour, I told her everything. About winning the lottery, about hiring Marcus Webb, about discovering the full extent of Carter's betrayal. I watched her face go through the same range of emotions I'd experienced, shock, anger, and finally, a kind of fierce determination. So you've known all along what Dad was planning? I've known, and I've been preparing my own response. What kind of response? The kind that will teach your father exactly what his greed and lies have cost him. Sophia was quiet for a long time, processing everything I'd told her. Grandpa, I still want to live with you. Even more now. I want to be here when Dad finds out that you're not the victim he thought you were. It's going to get ugly, Sophia. Your father is going to be very angry when his plans fall apart. Let him be angry. Maybe it's time someone in this family stood up to him. That afternoon, I helped Sophia call her mother and explain that she wanted to finish her senior year living with me. Carter's ex-wife Lisa had always liked me, and after Sophia explained some of what she discovered about Carter's current behavior, Lisa agreed to the arrangement. When Carter called that evening, furious about Sophia's decision, I let him vent for several minutes before I spoke. Carter, Sophia is welcome to stay here as long as she wants. Dad, she's 17 years old. She doesn't understand the implications of this decision. What implications are those, son? She needs structure, supervision. You're not. I mean, at your age, with your current state of mind. My current state of mind? Carter, Sophia can stay here, and you can visit her anytime you want. But I won't send her back to a house where she's uncomfortable. After Carter hung up, Sophia hugged me tighter than she had since she was a little girl. Thank you, Grandpa. For letting me stay, for telling me the truth about everything. Thank you for choosing to be here. It means more to me than you know. That night, as I helped Sophia set up the spare bedroom that had once been her father's, I realized that the family I'd been trying so hard to reconnect with was restructuring itself in ways I'd never expected. I'd lost my son, probably permanently. But I'd gained an ally who shared my values and wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right. In the battle that was coming, having Sophia on my side was going to make all the difference. Having Sophia living with me changed everything about my plans. For 2 weeks, I watched my granddaughter settle into a routine that was completely different from the life she'd been living with Carter and Madison. She volunteered at the community center 3 days a week, helped Grace with grocery shopping and yard work, and spent her evenings doing homework at my kitchen table while we talked about everything from college plans to her hopes for the future. What struck me most was how relaxed Sophia seemed. Away from Carter's constant pressure to maintain appearances and pursue activities that would look good to college admissions officers, she became a different person. More confident, more genuine, more comfortable with who she really was. But I also knew that Carter wasn't going to give up easily. Marcus Webb reported that my son had been escalating his timeline for the guardianship proceedings. Having Sophia move in with me had apparently convinced Carter that I was becoming more unstable and potentially dangerous to myself and others. Carter had filed an emergency petition claiming that my decision to let a teenage girl live with me showed impaired judgment and possible cognitive decline. He was painting Sophia's choice to stay with me as evidence that I was manipulating her, taking advantage of a minor who couldn't understand the risks of living with someone who was mentally deteriorating. The irony was staggering. Carter was using his own daughter's rejection of his values as evidence that I was the one with poor judgment. But Carter's accelerated timeline worked in my favor. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following Friday, which gave me exactly 1 week to prepare my response. And I had a response plan that would expose Carter's true motivations to everyone who mattered. First, I called a family meeting. Not the kind of meeting Carter was expecting, but a gathering that would include everyone who needed to understand what was really happening. I invited Madison, who had been living in increasing tension with Carter since our conversation about his financial lies. I invited Grace, who had become like a mother to me in recent weeks. I invited Marcus Webb, who would be present as my witness and investigator. And I invited Carter, telling him I wanted to discuss Sophia's living arrangements and my plans for the future. I didn't tell him about the other guests. The meeting was set for Thursday evening, exactly 24 hours before Carter's guardianship hearing. I wanted to give him one last chance to see reason, one final opportunity to choose honesty over manipulation. But I also wanted to make sure that when Carter's greed was finally exposed, there would be witnesses who could testify to exactly what kind of man my son really was. On Wednesday night, Sophia and I prepared the living room for what I knew would be the most important family gathering of my life. We moved furniture to create a circle of chairs, set up the recording equipment Marcus had provided, and made sure every detail was perfect. "Grandpa, are you nervous?" Sophia asked as we arranged the last of the chairs. "A little. This is going to change everything between your father and me." "It's already changed. Dad changed it when he decided to steal from you. What if he surprises us? What if, when confronted with the truth, he decides to admit his mistakes and try to make things right?" Sophia looked at me with the kind of wisdom that sometimes comes early to children who've seen too much. "Grandpa, do you really think Dad is going to suddenly become a different person?" "No. But I want to give him the chance." Thursday evening arrived with an October chill that seemed appropriate for what was about to happen. Carter was the first to arrive, looking confident and professional in one of his expensive suits. His confidence faltered slightly when he saw that other people were already in the living room. "Dad, I thought this was going to be a private family discussion." "It is a family discussion, Carter. Grace is family. Marcus is here as my advisor. And Madison, well, Madison has some things she needs to say." Carter looked at his wife with confusion and growing alarm. Madison had been increasingly distant since learning about his financial lies, but Carter still believed he could manage her reactions and keep her supporting his version of events. Madison, what's going on? Sit down, Carter. Your father has some information he wants to share with everyone. Carter took the chair directly across from me, his lawyer instincts telling him to control the situation even though he didn't understand what was happening. Dad, before we start, I need you to know that I've been worried about you. This decision to let Sophia live here, some of the conversations we've had recently. I think you might need some help. What kind of help? Professional help. Someone who can make sure you're making good decisions, managing your affairs properly. Carter was sticking to his script, building his case for guardianship even in front of witnesses. He was so confident in his plan that he couldn't see the trap he was walking into. Carter, before we talk about my judgment or my ability to manage my affairs, I think everyone should understand exactly what kind of affairs I'm managing. I pulled out the folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Bank statements, lottery documents, investment records, everything that proved I was worth $847 million. I won the lottery, Carter. The biggest jackpot in state history. I've been a multimillionaire for over 2 months. The silence in the room was deafening. Carter stared at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible. Dad, if you had won the lottery, you would have told me. You would have. I would have what, Carter? Shared it with the son who's been planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can steal my savings? Carter's face went white. Madison gasped audibly. Grace reached over and squeezed my hand. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Marcus, would you like to share some of your findings with the group? For the next 30 minutes, Marcus presented a detailed account of Carter's schemes. The forged documents, the recorded phone calls, the consultations with elder law attorneys, the emergency guardianship petition that was scheduled to be heard the next morning. With each revelation, Carter's composure cracked a little more. By the time Marcus finished, my son looked like a man who just watched his entire life collapse. Carter, I said quietly, you were planning to steal what you thought was my life savings. Instead, you were planning to steal $800 million. Dad, you have to understand. I was desperate. The debts, the pressure from Madison's family. So you decided to solve your problems by destroying your father. Carter looked around the room at the faces staring back at him, his wife's disgust, Grace's disappointment, Sophia's anger, Marcus's professional contempt. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Now you learn what your greed has cost you. The silence in my living room stretched on for what felt like hours. Carter sat there, staring at the evidence of his scheme spread across my coffee table, while everyone else waited to see how he would respond to being completely exposed. Finally, he looked up at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before, genuine fear. Dad, I can explain everything. The financial problems, the guardianship petition, it's not what it looks like. Really? Then explain it to us, Carter. Explain how planning to have your father declared mentally incompetent is actually an act of love. Carter's lawyer instincts kicked in, and I could see him trying to construct a defense even as his world crumbled around him. I was worried about you. The phone calls where you seemed confused, the way you've been isolating yourself. I thought you might be developing dementia. Carter, Sophia said, her voice sharp with anger, I heard you bragging to that lawyer about how easy it would be to manipulate Grandpa. Stop lying. Carter turned to his daughter with desperation in his voice. Sophia, you don't understand the whole situation. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. Like the difficult decision to steal your father's money to pay off gambling debts? Madison interrupted. All eyes turned to Madison, and I could see Carter realizing that his wife knew everything about his financial lies. Madison, we can talk about this at home. This isn't the place. No, Carter. We're going to talk about it right here, right now. I want everyone to hear exactly what kind of man I married. Madison stood up and faced her husband with a fury I'd never seen from her before. For over a year, you've been lying to me about our finances. Fake bank statements, fake investment portfolios, fake mortgage approvals. You made me believe we were financially secure while you were borrowing money from loan sharks. Carter tried to interrupt, but Madison wasn't finished. And when your debts got too big to hide, instead of telling me the truth, you decided to steal from your own father. A man who sacrificed everything to give you the education and opportunities that made you successful. Madison, please. I'm not done. Her voice cracked with emotion. You told my parents that your father was an alcoholic to explain why we never visited him. You told your coworkers he was senile to explain why he wasn't part of our social life. You've spent years trashing the reputation of the man who raised you, and for what? So you wouldn't be embarrassed by his blue-collar background? Carter's face flushed red. You don't understand what it was like growing up poor, having a father who came to school events covered in grease, living in a house where we worried about paying bills. So you decided to repay him by destroying his independence and stealing his life savings? It wasn't supposed to be stealing. I was going to pay him back when my investments paid off. With what money, Carter? I asked quietly. You've already lost most of the $50,000 I loaned you. Your cryptocurrency investment failed completely. Carter's shoulders sagged as he realized there was no point in continuing to lie. How do you know about the cryptocurrency? I know about everything, Carter. Every debt, every lie, every scheme. I've been investigating your life for weeks. You've been what? Marcus Webb opened his briefcase and pulled out another folder. Mr. Thompson hired me to conduct a complete background investigation of your activities. We have documentation of every loan you've taken, every lie you've told, every step of your plan to gain control of your father's finances. Carter stared at me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been admiration. You played me. This whole time, you knew what I was planning, and you just let me dig my own grave. I gave you opportunities to tell the truth, Carter. Multiple opportunities. You chose to lie every single time. What's going to happen to me? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who had repaid that love by planning to destroy my independence and steal my life savings. That depends on what you do next. What do you mean? I mean you have a choice to make. You can fight this, deny everything, try to convince people that I'm the villain in this story. Or you can accept responsibility for what you've done and try to salvage what's left of your relationships with the people in this room. Carter looked around at his family, his wife who was staring at him with disgust, his daughter who couldn't even look at him, his father who had just outmaneuvered him completely. If I admit what I did, what happens then? Then we figure out how to move forward. I'm not interested in sending you to prison, Carter. I'm interested in making sure this never happens again. And if I don't admit it? Then tomorrow morning, at your guardianship hearing, Marcus will present all of his evidence to the judge. Your petition will be dismissed, you'll be facing criminal charges for fraud and elder abuse, and you'll lose everything anyway. Carter was quiet for a long time, weighing his options. Finally, he spoke in a voice so quiet I could barely hear him. I did it. Everything you said, everything Marcus documented. I did all of it. Madison started crying. Sophia shook her head in disgust. Grace just looked sad. Why, Carter? I asked. Why did you think this was acceptable? Because I was desperate. Because I've been pretending to be someone I'm not for so long that I forgot how to be honest. Because I convinced myself that you wouldn't miss money you never expected to have. But mostly, he continued, his voice breaking, because I've spent so many years being ashamed of where I came from that I lost sight of what really matters. Carter looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Dad, I know you probably can't forgive me. I know I've destroyed any chance of having a real relationship with you. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. Not sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I planned to do to you. I studied my son's face, looking for any sign that this admission was just another manipulation. But what I saw was genuine remorse, and something I hadn't seen from Carter in years, vulnerability. Carter, I'm going to ask you to do something, and how you respond will determine what happens next. What? I want you to call the court and withdraw your guardianship petition. Tonight. I want you to call your lawyer and tell him the whole truth about why you filed it. Carter nodded slowly. And then? Then we start figuring out how to rebuild some trust between us. It's going to take time, and it's going to require you to make some major changes in how you live your life. What kind of changes? The kind where you stop being ashamed of your family and start being grateful for what you have. As the evening wound down and people began to leave, Carter lingered behind. When we were alone, he looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. Dad, do you think there's any chance? I mean, is it possible that someday we could have a real relationship again? I thought about everything that had happened, all the lies and schemes and betrayals. But I also thought about the man who'd raised Carter to be better than this, and the possibility that somewhere inside my successful, manipulative son was still the boy who used to help me in the garage. Carter, I think that depends entirely on who you choose to be from here forward. The next morning brought news that I wasn't entirely prepared for. Carter had indeed called the court and withdrawn his guardianship petition, but he'd also done something I hadn't expected. He'd driven to Madison's parents' house at midnight and told them everything. Madison called me at 7 a.m., her voice shaky with exhaustion and emotion. Bart, my father wants to meet with you. Today. He's not handling Carter's confession very well. Richard Whitmore was a man accustomed to being in control of every situation. He owned hotels, sat on corporate boards, and had spent his entire life making deals and managing crises. But his son-in-law's financial fraud and attempted elder abuse had caught him completely off guard. I agreed to meet him at his downtown office, a gleaming tower that epitomized everything Carter had been desperately trying to become part of. When I arrived, Richard was pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. For what? For not seeing what kind of man my daughter married. For not protecting my family from his lies. Richard pulled out a thick folder and set it on his desk. After Carter left last night, I called my investigators and had them work through the night. What they found, it's worse than what your man Marcus discovered. The folder contained evidence of financial fraud that went beyond anything I'd imagined. Carter hadn't just borrowed money from questionable sources, he'd been embezzling from his law firm's client trust accounts. Mr. Whitmore, how long has this been going on? At least 18 months. Carter's been using client funds to cover his personal debts, then replacing the money when new cases brought in fees. It's a classic Ponzi scheme, except he was robbing his own clients. The implications were staggering. Not only had Carter been planning to steal from me, but he'd been stealing from people who trusted him with their legal problems and their money. The partners at his firm are meeting this morning to decide whether to turn this over to the district attorney or try to handle it quietly. What would happen if they report it? Carter would be disbarred, probably face criminal charges. He could go to prison for 10 to 15 years. I sat in that expensive office chair, looking out at the city skyline, trying to process the fact that my son's crimes were so much worse than I discovered. Mr. Whitmore, what do you want from me? I want to know what you're planning to do about Carter. My daughter's future is tied to his, and I need to know how much damage control I'm going to have to do. I'm not planning to do anything about Carter. He's an adult who made his own choices. But you could help him. With your lottery winnings, you could pay back what he stole from his clients, keep him out of prison. The request caught me off guard. Here was Richard Whitmore, a man who'd spent years looking down on me, asking me to use my money to save Carter from the consequences of his actions. Why would I do that? Because he's your son. And because my daughter loves him, despite everything he's done. I thought about Madison, about the young woman who'd been manipulated and lied to for over a year. Did she really love Carter, or was she just trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her marriage? Mr. Whitmore, I'll make you a deal. I'll consider helping Carter with his legal problems, but only if he agrees to complete financial rehabilitation and makes genuine amends to everyone he's hurt. What kind of amends? Full disclosure to Madison about everything, every lie, every debt, every scheme. Repayment to his clients with interest. And a public apology to his family for the damage he's caused. Richard nodded slowly. And if he agrees to those terms? Then I'll pay his debts and help him start over. But he'll start over as the man he really is, not the fantasy version he's been trying to maintain. That afternoon, I found myself in another unexpected meeting. Carter had asked to see me alone, and we met at the same diner where I'd first encountered Vincent Ashworth months ago in my previous life of family secrets. Carter looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and his hands were shaking as he drank his coffee. "Dad," Madison's father told me about his investigators. About what they found at my law firm. "I know. I'm going to lose my license. Probably go to prison. And I deserve it." Carter's voice was hollow, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. "Dad, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." "I'm listening." "I've hated being your son for most of my adult life. Not because you were a bad father, but because I was ashamed of being poor, ashamed of having a father who worked with his hands, ashamed of everything that reminded me of where I came from." The honesty was brutal, but I could tell this wasn't manipulation. This was confession. When I got into that fancy prep school, when I started meeting kids whose fathers were doctors and lawyers and business owners, I decided I wanted to be them instead of being me. And being them meant not being your son. Carter wiped his eyes with a napkin that was already soaked with tears. "Every sacrifice you made for me, I saw as a reminder of our poverty. Every extra job you worked, every time you went without something so I could have what I needed, it just highlighted how different we were from the families I wanted to belong to." "Carter. Let me finish, Dad. Please." I nodded, letting him continue. "The worst part is that I knew you loved me. I knew everything you did was motivated by wanting to give me a better life. But instead of being grateful, I resented you for not already being the kind of father I thought I deserved." Carter set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me. "I convinced myself that you were holding me back, that your expectations were too small, that your values were outdated. But the truth is, I was just a selfish, ungrateful son who threw away the most important relationship in his life because I was embarrassed by authentic love." The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, but our corner booth felt isolated from everything else. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I've done. I know I can't take back years of treating you like an embarrassment. But I need you to know that I finally understand what I lost." "What did you lose, Carter?" "I lost the chance to know the man who raised me. I lost the relationship with the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. I lost my integrity, my family, and my self-respect." Carter reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is a letter I wrote to the district attorney, confessing to everything I've done. The embezzlement, the fraud, the plan to steal from you. I'm going to turn myself in this afternoon." I stared at the envelope, understanding that Carter was choosing to face the consequences of his actions rather than letting me rescue him. "Why?" "Because you taught me that a man takes responsibility for his mistakes. It just took me 30 years to remember that lesson." As we sat in that diner, I realized that my son was finally becoming the man I'd always hoped he could be. It was happening 20 years too late and at the cost of everything he'd built, but it was happening. "Carter, before you turn yourself in, there's something I want you to do." "What?" "I want you to come home with me and have dinner with your daughter. She needs to hear what you just told me." Carter nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. "Dad, do you think, after everything that's happened, do you think Sophia could ever forgive me?" "I think Sophia loves you enough to try. But you're going to have to earn it." As we left the diner together, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel ever again. For the first time in years, I was proud of my son. 6 months later, I was sitting in a visitor's room at the state correctional facility, waiting for my weekly visit with Carter. The room was stark and institutional, nothing like the fancy restaurants and offices where we'd conducted most of our important conversations over the years. But these prison visits had become the most honest conversations Carter and I had shared since he was a child. True to his word, Carter had turned himself in to the district attorney. He'd pled guilty to embezzlement, fraud, and attempted elder abuse. The judge had sentenced him to 3 years in prison, with possibility of parole in 18 months for his cooperation and full restitution to his victims. I'd kept my promise to Richard Whitmore. Using my lottery winnings, I'd paid back every penny Carter had stolen from his clients, with interest. I'd also established a fund to help other elderly people who might fall victim to financial exploitation by family members. But the money was the easy part. The real work had been rebuilding relationships that had been damaged by years of lies and misplaced priorities. Madison had filed for divorce, but not out of anger. She'd explained to me that she needed to discover who she was outside of the life Carter had constructed for them. She'd moved back in with her parents temporarily, but she visited Carter regularly and they were working with counselors to see if their marriage could survive his transformation. I fell in love with the man Carter was pretending to be, she'd told me. Now I need to find out if I can love the man he really is. Sophia had finished her senior year living with me, and the experience had changed both of us. She'd been accepted to engineering school with a full scholarship, planning to study automotive design. When people asked her why she'd chosen that field, she'd tell them it was because her grandfather had taught her that working with your hands was just as noble as working with your mind. Grace had become the grandmother Sophia had never really had. The three of us had developed a routine of Sunday dinners and shared projects around the house. Grace taught Sophia to cook traditional Chinese dishes, while I taught her advanced automotive repair. It was an unlikely family, but it worked. When Carter walked into the visiting room that day, he looked different than he had 6 months earlier. Prison had changed him in ways that success never had. He was thinner, quieter, more thoughtful. The arrogance and desperation were gone, replaced by something that looked like peace. "Dad, thanks for coming. I know the drive isn't easy. It's not that bad. Besides, where else am I going to go?" Carter smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in years. "How's Sophia doing with her college preparations?" "She's excited. A little nervous about leaving home, but excited. And she's still okay with me writing to her?" "Carter, your daughter loves you. She's disappointed in the choices you made, but she loves you." We talked for an hour about ordinary things, Sophia's college plans, Grace's health, my adjustments to retirement with unlimited resources. But toward the end of the visit, Carter brought up something that had been weighing on him. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Okay. Do you think I can ever really change? Not just the obvious things like not stealing or lying, but the deeper stuff. The shame about where I came from, the need to impress people who don't matter." I thought about his question carefully. "Carter, I think you're already changing. The man who stole from his clients and planned to steal from his father couldn't have had the conversation we just had. But what if I get out of here and fall back into old patterns? What if I see my old colleagues and friends and start feeling ashamed again? Then you'll have to make a choice. You can choose to be the man you were, or you can choose to be the man you want to become." Carter was quiet for a moment. "Dad, if I do change, if I really become a better person, would you want to have a relationship with me? A real relationship?" I looked at my son, sitting across from me in prison clothes, asking for something he'd thrown away years ago out of pride and selfishness. "Carter, I've wanted a real relationship with you for 20 years. I'm not going to stop wanting it now. Even after everything I did to you? Especially after everything you did to me. Because now I know you understand what real relationships cost and what they're worth." On the drive home from the prison, I thought about the strange turns my life had taken since winning that lottery ticket. I'd set out to test my family's love and loyalty, and I'd discovered truths that were both more painful and more hopeful than I'd expected. I'd lost the son I thought I had, but I'd gained the possibility of knowing the son Carter might become. I'd lost a marriage built on lies, but I'd gained a daughter-in-law who was learning to value authenticity over appearances. I'd lost the fantasy of a perfect family, but I'd gained a granddaughter who shared my values and a neighbor who'd become my chosen family. Most importantly, I'd learned that money, even $800 million, couldn't buy the things that mattered most. Love, respect, and genuine relationships had to be earned through consistent actions over time. When I got home that evening, Sophia was in the garage working on her car, preparing for a road trip to visit colleges. Grace was in the kitchen making dinner for all of us. The house was full of the sounds of people who'd chosen to be there, who valued each other for who they really were. "How was Dad?" Sophia asked, looking up from under the hood. "He's doing better. He asked me to tell you he's proud of your scholarship." "Is he really changing, Grandpa? Or is he just saying what people want to hear?" "I think he's really changing. But Sophia, people can only change if they want to. Your father has to choose, every day, to be better than he was. And you think he'll make the right choices?" I thought about Carter, sitting in that prison visiting room, asking if it was possible to overcome decades of shame and selfishness. I thought about the man who'd worked 3 jobs to give his son opportunities, and the son who'd thrown those opportunities away before finally understanding their value. I think your father is finally learning what I tried to teach him when he was your age. That where you come from doesn't matter as much as who you choose to be. And that family isn't about what you can get from people, but what you're willing to give. At 70 years old, I'd learned that the best families aren't always the ones you're born into. Sometimes they're the ones you build through forgiveness, second chances, and the courage to love people despite their flaws. Carter would be released in 12 months. When that happened, he'd have the chance to prove whether his transformation was real. He'd have the opportunity to rebuild relationships with his daughter, his ex-wife, and his father. But most importantly, he'd have the chance to discover something I'd known all along, that the most valuable inheritance isn't money or property or social status. It's the knowledge that you're loved for who you really are, and that you're strong enough to love others the same way. As I watched Sophia work on her car with the same focus and determination I'd had at her age, I smiled. Whatever mistakes I'd made as a father, whatever failures I'd had in teaching Carter to value the right things, I had a second chance with my granddaughter. And this time, I was going to make sure she understood from the beginning that love isn't conditional on success, that family isn't about appearances, and that the greatest wealth is knowing you're valued for exactly who you are. The end.